Hey, welcome to Fireside Tattoo Podcast and Painting Podcast today. We're here at the Venetian gathering, and we have Dan Marshall today. And so I wasn't, like we were talking about a little bit before, I was familiar with your name, and I didn't know if I knew you as a tattooer or as a painter, but you were a tattooer well before you were a painter. And it's funny, you were talking about starting out at Last Rites and doing a lot of fantasy art and listening to dark music and painting at night, and you break out these watercolors that are beautiful.
It's pretty much the flip side.
But they're the flip side, yeah, absolutely. So what? Well, let me start with this. Your time, how is it divided between painting and tattooing now?
Now it's fairly. Well, I probably paint more.
Yeah.
Only because it's more accessible. There's a lot less prep involved. And you don't have to wait for your customer to be there, and it's just a lot more. I guess it's an accessible thing. As far as my emotional interest in my drive, I'm at the point now where I'm level. My tattooing feeds my painting, and my painting feeds my tattooing. Okay. But I probably, I'll do maybe 4 appointments a week, larger appointments, but 4 good size appointments a week, and then I'm probably doing 20 to 30 paintings a week. So,
so you're working.
It's just a different type of thing. But I'm always doing. I don't waste time.
Right.
I guess,
But as far as the hours put in, they're pretty similar. Just the paintings go a little faster than the tattoos.
Yeah.
So I was going to get into this maybe a little bit later, but you went to you've moved to landscapes, cityscapes, mostly in watercolor, I assume.
Yeah, all watercolor. It's to me, it's watercolor specific. I broke away from doing tattoo-related imagery, and the watercolor was the push and the drive for that. I had sort of come across an exhibit of watercolor paintings that were done in a more impressionist kind of style, and it wasn't. I never thought, I could, because I was painting in oils and acrylics and pastel, and I never thought, I'd like to do this in oil, which I was more comfortable with. It was more about I want to do this in watercolor for the sake of watercolor and exploit what watercolor has to offer.
Yes. Well, but I know a lot of tattooers that paint in watercolor, not at all like you do. But tattooers are a lot of times familiar with watercolor because they use it to paint flash and things like that. I had painted traditional flash, when I first started out. I was in the early 90s, and I was super into traditional style tattoos, and we were doing spit shading, and we were, so in a way, I have I guess the only similarity is brush control, how to hold a brush, but even when you're doing more technical kind of tattoo watercolor paintings, it's a completely, I hold my brushes all as far back as possible. It's the same brushes, but you're moving differently, and most tattoo related watercolors you're using Martin's paint or like a liquid acrylics or something that is at a really nice consistency to do everything in. And with the style of painting I'm doing now, you need to have a much thicker pigment at times when you're working wet and wet. If you're using all the same consistency of paint, it just makes a mess. Yeah. So it's you're exploiting the full range of what watercolor can offer, from super translucent and super thin paint to straight out of the tube thickness, which I think traditional tattoo watercolor painting misses that, because it's not the effect that you're looking for. You can apply it to tattoo-related images for sure, but I think technically it's if you're spit shading, it's a different sort of technique. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. I noticed looking at the couple of paintings that you brought today that a couple of them looked like they were almost dry brushed, like you had kind of drug, and you really saw a lot of the tooth of the paper, and then some of it was very fluid. You're exploiting various stages of wetness on the paper. So some stuff you're doing almost dry brush on dry paper. Sometimes you're doing sort of dry brush on wet paper. There's it's you have all these combinations it becomes much more, it's really easy until you know what you're doing. But then because then it's all just timing. You want to use
there's a time and a place to use really thin washes, and then there's a time to use thicker washes, and there's a time when if you tried to put that dry brush on too wet of a paper, it would just turn into like a mush. So it's there's a lot of timing involved.
Yeah.
But it's fast. You can do a full painting in an hour to an hour and a half. But it's you sort of have to know when to hold them and when to walk away.
Right,
It's all timing.
What as far as from a technique standpoint, it's not at all similar to tattooing. What has it brought to your tattooing, if anything?
Well, I work primarily black and gray for the last probably 15 years of my tattooing, and it's much more illustrative. My style of tattooing, it's realism but not realistic. I'm not a photo realist jockey.
More like illustrative realism.
Right, it's more illustrative realism, it's my watercolor painting is primarily tonal. So you're looking at warm colors and cool colors, and basically tones, lighter atmospheric perspective. So your lighter tones are farther back, and it gets darker as you come up. And constantly studying those tonal qualities and applying that to painting has really elevated my black and gray tattooing, because I'm much more sensitive to, there should be a mid-tone here, there should be a light tone here. Where, I guess, with the more illustrative black and gray tattooing, it's also fairly graphic. I'm fairly contrasty, and I think now I'm contrasty when I want to be, not just out of fault or or shortcutting. So it's definitely, I feel like it's brought a wider range of the way I see what I'm going to tattoo and the way I'm going to translate things, and it goes back and forth from effects I'll do tattooing and watercolor. It's it's weird because people are like, why don't you paint your watercolors, or why don't you tattoo your watercolors?
Yeah,
and it's different. Like the current watercolor tattoo is, let's put some splashes on there and let's do some stuff that might not last a whole super long time.
Right.
And really, the way my watercolor painting, I try to be very painterly. So it's sort of, there's oil painting things in there and effects that would be easier to translate to tattooing, where it's basically just if you were translating fine art into tattooing, which I've done. Probably people have done Van Gogh paintings, or there's I don't know what else is popular, but everyone's at some point or another translated some sort of painting into tattooing. And it would be the same kind of thing, without really trying to make it look like a watercolor tattoo. I guess. It's more like I would rather do more painterly tattoos.
Yeah. You brought up a point that I've always noticed with successful watercolor artists. You talked about the tones, working tonally, and I think, I'm not a watercolor painter. I typically paint in oil, or I only paint in oil. It seems like subtlety and value is something that if anything would teach your eye to recognize subtlety and value, it would have to be watercolor painting.
Also, there's a whole school of oil painters who paint tonally too. So I think it's probably harder in watercolor.
It seems like it's harder in watercolor, but for some reason.
You, depending on the mood that you want to, if you want a more somber kind of misty mood, and you keep all your values kind of close together, so there's no real sunlight, there's no real pop, there's no real so it's
which is from tattooing, when you really need to push contrast harder than you think you should.
And that's, I think that the difference with my tattooing, I tattoo for the future. Everything I do is it's contrasty on purpose, because
it needs to live.
I don't want you to have a big gray mush on your, which, I don't know about the current state of tattooing affairs, but there's a lot of over saturation in black and gray, which is, I don't know. I would like to say after a couple good summers, you're not going to have any, contrast. So I like to leave enough skin to have some pop. So a lot of my painting, I kind of probably err on the contrasty side. It's like, that's very strong. It's very contrasty, and which is great when you're doing like a sunny scene and stuff, because you really get that feeling of sunlight. but trying to, if anything, I try probably to bring my tones closer together when I'm painting than tattooing.
Yeah. We were talking yesterday in Nick's interview. We talked a lot of painting, and we talked about the idea of families of values and trying to keep your say your lightest dark always darker than your darkest light, and just keeping trying to imagine that if you've split the value scale in this mass, these are your darker masses and they should never creep into this area. And in some of these scenes in watercolor, it looks like they do intermingle a lot. And I wonder if you find yourself with areas that kind of compete or confuse the eye. Is that a tricky thing to get past when you're dealing with a lot of subtlety in value? Maybe
I think if you are you familiar with James Gurney, the way he paints? He does all the chromatic stuff, and I'm not that smart. Like it's just
I don't know anyone that's as smart as James.
Even like it's I'll do certain effects with staying within a tonal range. Sort of accidentally on purpose, because I'll sort of, you're basically painting in warms and cools, So if I need to warm something up, I'm basically just adding a little bit of warmth, earthy color to my cool mix. So I've got this sort of puddle that maintains in a sense. So as long as I'm, because I'm not like just taking I'm always mixing at least 3 colors of my paint. So it's I think I guess it's different than when you're oil painting, because you're applying paint in a sense. You're pushing the paint, and there's a lot of effects that the paint is mixing on the paper. So you're pre-mixing, but then your pre-mixes are then mixing with each other on the paper.
Right.
So there's probably 60% of the painting that you're not doing. It's.
But you're planning for, or are you able to plan for it? I guess.
Yes. Yeah. You're the director. You're the conductor, and then all your tiny little particles of pigment are your million-man orchestra. And you're just sort of directing them where to go. The more you try to. And I think that's like when I teach oil painters that take my workshops, or the hardest thing is losing that control and losing that. You've got to hold your brush basically like a pencil, because it's water. You want it to come down, and if you're holding it like an oil painter and you're sword fighting your painting, like it's. So that wanting to push and control, and I'm the artist and I'm doing this, is
give that up to
you totally have to abandon that, But as far as going back to the issue of the that tonal range, I guess it's more what makes it painting outside important is you're sort of painting from life, and you're painting with the light of the day, and you're making decisions based on current conditions. So when I'm out super early morning and everything's sort of foggy and gray and whatever, I'm using a much closer range of tonal values and trying to you'll know if it's wrong. The only thing you can do with watercolor is glazing. So if your foreground is way too light after you've got your sort of middle ground in, you can, after all is said and done, you can then put a nice glaze over the front of your foreground and then sort of bring those tones back together. But that's about the extent of your post-editing once it's dry,
I was, we were podcasting at the Portrait Society of America conference, not the one that just passed, but last year's in Atlanta, and I watched, I think it's Mary White. Mm-hmm. I watched her paint on stage alongside one of my favorite oil painters, Kwang Ho, who just does some incredible. He's very impasto. He uses a ton of paint. Yeah. And Mary was because she's a watercolor artist. Her planning took a lot longer. She was very controlled, and she was. For the longest time, it looked like a disaster. And Kwang Ho drops 5 strokes down, and you can already see where he's going. It looks awesome.
Right.
But suddenly, it all shifted, and whenever hers started to come together, it was beautiful. But I was so impressed with the control, the discipline that it takes to know where your lights are, to leave those things alone, to the planning, the forethought that it took.
You're painting in reverse, I guess, in a sense. But it's the disaster is where it's at, and because it's like every single painting, when you're painting outside, there's a point where it looks like a child is doing it, and people walking by are like, "Oh, you'll get there,"
Yeah,
you know. And you're like, "Okay," but then because you have to paint for the future of the painting, so you're you're dropping in all these weird, subtle undertones that you're going to then paint on top of after, but those will be your lights that come through. So it is it's mostly forethought. It's
So are you starting with your planning phase? When you sit down, are you painting mostly from life? Do you ever paint from photographs?
I do paint from photographs for larger stuff, like when I'm painting I paint in the studio. It's different. But for me, like people who are just studio painters, there's a certain lack of spontaneity and a lack of something. You can tell what's painted in the studio and what's not.
And a lot of problems are solved through the photograph and on the
right. So I paint outside enough. Almost. I like to say it's every day, but it's maybe every other day. It's definitely a few times a week.
Yeah. So is there?
But that energy that you get from painting outside, you can then paint from a photograph, and you'll make decisions based on decisions that you've made outside.
Yeah.
So, but it's important to do both, I think, and you can do more complex work inside. And
we a guy that I took a workshop from and then podcasted with named Jeffrey Hine. I don't know if you know him at all in Salt Lake City. He paints exclusively from life. He took he painted from photos for years, took kind of a hiatus from painting, and came back and paints only from life. And when I talked to him about it, he had an interesting answer. He said that if you go to the gym and you want to get stronger, you don't take weights off, you put weights on to get stronger. So I feel like if I want to be a better painter, I need to remove any crutch that I have. And photographs to me were a crutch.
Right.
And they made things easier. So if I want to be a stronger painter, I need to focus on painting from life. And it's worked because his paintings are just incredible.
Oh, right. Well, my teacher, his name is Joseph Zerbukvich, and he's an Australian guy, and that's who I've basically learned painting from exclusively, and it's in his sort of way of his approach, and his method is basically what I employ. When I was starting to paint, he said there's no better teacher than Mother Nature. You're not going to learn color mixing by trying to mix the colors in a photograph, which are limited. You're not seeing with your own eyes the subtleties of color, so by going outside, you're removing any crutch, because not only are you dealing with the elements and the thing, you're dealing with people.
Right.
Painting in Venice is great because, I paint in New York City, so it's the difference in New York is when you're painting on the street, nobody fucking cares. Right. Like everyone's doing something, When you're painting in Central Park, you're part of the show. Everyone, did you do that? Or no, I'm just standing here.
Right.
And the same thing in Venice. Oh, it's so romantic. This guy's painting in Venice. Like that's what painters do, And
right.
So it's when I was talking to Nick, there's so many quiet spots of Venice though, where you go around a corner and which is what Google Maps is awesome for, because I found a bunch of little hidey holes that are fantastic. They're beautiful spots, but the average Joe doesn't care because they're just walking around and looking at Louis Vuitton, there's so much around. But
have you been here before? Was this your first trip? Or?
No, I came after the Milan convention. My anniversary, my wedding is Valentine's Day, and we used to go to Paris every year, and it really conflicts with the Milan convention. So one year my wife let us take a break and go to the Milan convention, and then we came to Venice for our anniversary after. Okay. And that was, I guess, 6 years ago, and I had just had that sort of breakthrough of like, this is what I'm going to do, like with watercolor painting, and which led from burnout. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but the I'll get back to that. But but coming here, I hadn't developed an eye. I didn't know what I was looking for. I have been an artist, but wasn't a fine artist, or I wasn't a traditional art, whatever. Right. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah.
But so I was just snapping photos away and like, oh, I'm going to paint this, I'm going to paint this, I'm going to paint. Everything is wrong. Like from the lighting to the compositions to I can't even crop these photos to make them what I would want to paint now. You know, so it's kind of like I'm here for the first time, but it's kind of like I'm so familiar with studying a lot of painters that have been in Venice, John Singer Sargent, James Moran, all kinds of, Turner.
Yeah.
So I'm so familiar with the place never changes. So you could have been here, 3 centuries ago, and it'd be like you're here today.
Yeah.
So it's there's all these things that I'm so familiar with, and I remember a lot of the layout from when I was here last time. That it's very comfortable for me to be here, but I feel like again in a way I feel like I'm seeing it again for the first time.
Yeah.
I guess because I'm seeing it with eyes that have been trained now to see what I want them to see.
Right.
I guess.
Right.
So it's a whole different scenario.
It's funny that you bring that up about just walking out into the world and trying to decipher and build a composition. I was talking with Nick about that yesterday, making he's recently started painting some landscapes.
Yep.
And and he's always been, from his description, very macro. He's always been right up on something, looking at textures. I was like, have you struggled with just not being overwhelmed by trying to find a composition? And he was like, it's impossible. He was like, it's so hard for me to like step back and build and not over render everything in the distance and everything in between. And so it's such a transition for tattooers, I think, moving into
Well, especially Nick.
Yeah.
He's so focused in. We were just talking about that too, because he took my workshop in New Mexico, and I couldn't. People like, that's cool that people do it, and people are like, oh, I'm gonna go out and paint every day now and whatever. And Nick did it, and he's doing it, and I'm like, it's really cool to see, because it's I feel like I gave him a little flick, he was wanting to do it, but but once you start to see those compositions and you become more comfortable, then you just see them everywhere, and you're like, oh, like walking around here, like, I could paint out the window, which is, it's you develop a different way of seeing and a different way of, I guess, different sensibilities, But the what I had mentioned about burnout before was I was traveling a lot, I was tattooing a lot, I was painting a lot, and I was selling everything, so it was like it became very mercenary, and it felt like I was working for myself, and you become a slave to your tattooing, and at a certain level of I'm drawing most of the stuff that I'm tattooing, so it's this has to be interesting. You start to build these pressures on yourself, and you get like, you can get pretty retarded about it.
You can, absolutely.
And I sort of had this like frizzle, and then I had seen this exhibit of the watercolor painting, and I thought, I'm going to do that, And the thing at first was, it was so non-mercenary. It's like, this is for me. I don't care if you like it. It doesn't even matter. No one's going to care if I'm doing this. So it was kind of this whole kind of diversion. And I think I felt as a tattooer, I was always pushing my art, pushing my painting. And I thought I was doing the right thing by doing that. But it really led to my demise, or luckily it led to what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But, I think it's really important as a tattooer to, it's a point in the industry now where if you're not a painter, you're probably not maybe I should say it. But to be working at a certain level, most people I know are a certain level of fine artist also.
Right.
And
I think it's a necessity today.
I was trying to do that with painting, but I was painting the stuff that I wanted to tattoo or could market to sell to tattoo clients. And but I think it's really important to explore other, like with what Nick is doing with the landscapes, because it's going to make him. You can't do the same thing, Yeah. And so you're using a different part of your brain. I guess it's like, if you're a musician and you're being creative, but you're using different functions of your brain than tattooing. And the same thing with painting. If you explore different types of things outside of what you normally do, it can be really kind of eye-opening.
Yeah. We talk a lot to, we do a lot of portfolio critiques just because we've done the show for a while and people just send in like, hey, will you take a look? Especially newer tattooers. And I always stress the importance of forcing yourself into a medium that forces you to make different marks than you make with a tattoo machine, where you just can't do the things that you do with a tattoo machine or with a pencil, a number 2 pencil and paper, or a pen, or whatever people are drawing with. And a lot of, especially newer tattooers, they're drawing from their favorite tattooers. They're using them as inspiration. They're and with American traditional and some of these styles being this new school kind of style or being really popular, a lot of people feel like, well, it's not supposed to look realistic, so I don't need, like, they can glaze over that part or skip it.
Right.
But it's really obvious, and I try to make the point, no matter what the imagery is or what the style is when they send it in, it's like, I don't believe that you've ever looked at that actual image in real life and pulled any information from it.
You're gonna make decisions based on what another artist made,
right?
And it becomes really obvious, because when you try to mimic things that aren't your own, unless you know how to get there yourself, then it looks correct.
Yeah.
That's
what I always try to
see a lot of that. With painters also,
Right. That artist that you're looking up to has already solved that problem in their own way,
right.
And now you're trying to solve it from their solution.
Right.
It's kind of a weird thing to try to do.
Yeah. Well, I always with artists that I admire, I always try to go back and find where they got it. So because there's always, everyone is inspired by something, or else you're not an artist. I don't know.
Yeah.
No man is an island.
Right.
Everyone is kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. In one sense or another.
Yeah.
So with younger artists and stuff, I always say, if you're looking to copy someone, look who they probably look to, and you'll find it in history. You'll find little bits and pieces of what everyone does in someone, and then you can make your own
decision
of art, based on other stuff. But at least you're learning. You're studying, and you're not just copying someone current, or you're learning from who they learned from and who they drew inspiration from.
Yeah, and drawing from multiple sources, which is important too.
Mm-hmm.
Remind me again who you said your mentor was. Who did you
His
say?
name is Joseph Zerbukovic. It's
Zerbukovic.
Zubuvic.
Okay.
There's Zbuvic.
American?
He's Croatian born, but he lives in Melbourne.
Okay. I just wanted to look him up. If people want to find, are you selling watercolor work regularly?
Yeah, I have on my website. There's usually stuff. I sort of try to maintain it, but like anything, pretty much anything on Instagram is probably available. My website's Dan Marshall Art.
Okay.
.com, but
that's just for painting? You said you separate painting and
there's
tattooing.
a link to my tattoo website on there too.
Okay. Are you taking new tattoo projects right now?
Yes, I am. I just moved to Denver, and I have an existing clientele there, but I'm still
building a little.
Still building there. I still travel back to New York about once a month for all my New York clients, and I'm still building my New York clients because I'll probably end up moving back at some point.
At some point,
yeah. Plus, it's New York, so I get to go back every month and a half.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you tried California for a little while and weren't crazy about it.
Yeah, it's sort of another long story, but there was I moved there for a reason, and that reason dissolved.
Okay.
Some friends of mine were partnering on a shop. It was in. I moved to Huntington Beach, but I was going to work in sort of inland in Orange County, which is a little too America for me.
Yeah.
I'm used to a little more of a urban fantasy land of New York City. It's
gotcha.
Not really America, I guess. It's different.
Well, Denver, I haven't spent a lot of time there, but it seems like it has a really established tattoo culture there.
There's a lot of young people. There's a lot of cool people. There's a lot of music. There's, it's a destination. There really isn't anything else around there. So if you're cool in Wyoming, you probably move to Denver.
Right.
So it becomes a place where. There's a lot of creatives, there's a lot of culture, there's a lot of it's a really neat mix, and a lot of it feels very much like different neighborhoods of New York. So it just felt comfortable from the moment we got there.
Yeah. Well, cool.
And yeah.
So booking appointments for you at danmarshallart.com. They can get to a link to book appointments.
Yep. And danmarshallart@gmail.com is my email. So it's
if you guys haven't looked at his watercolors, they're incredible. And we'll have been dropping them through this interview, especially since we only have one camera on this trip, and no one wants to stare at the two of us for however long it's been.
Nice.
So we'll drop that in, and hopefully, maybe while you're painting, maybe we can grab a little footage.
Sure,
so I can
absolutely.
get just something else to drop in over this.
Yep.
So cool, man. Thanks so much for doing it.
Thank you very
Great
much.
meeting
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you guys. Tattooimprovement.com. Sign up. See you guys later.